Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. Happy Women Seeking Wholeness Wednesday. I'm Cherie Burton and this is episode 179. It's been in you all along. The question I have here at the onset is, have you lost this ability to feel the interconnectivity of all things? You hear a lot of teachers talk about how we're all one, all the stuff around oneness and the all. Oftentimes, though, we feel separate, we feel alone, and we chronically self-doubt. Whether it's our own intuition or whatever it might be, we've been kind of programmed to do that. Honestly, this is a paradox because these states of feeling separate and alone can be very strong teachers. In fact, they're often the entryway into our full awakening. So Gitanjali Hemp is a master energy healer and visionary mystic of over 2 decades. She helps people awaken to the magic of creation and fully embody their unique brilliance in service to the whole. So she brings over 23 years of study and training with healers and masters from some of the world's richest traditions and most cutting-edge healing models. So you're going to hear also in this episode why I actually stopped fighting the darkness. Why I just put down that sword and just being able to come into a state of inner harmony and inner alignment, which I've been talking a lot about lately, to sustain a deep listening and a slowing down so that we can really hear our own truth. So I hope you love this episode today, and remember to follow us on Instagram, cherie.burton, as well as ask to join our private Facebook group, Women Seeking Wholeness. Gitanjali, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. So glad to have you on.
So glad to be here.
I was like, I better hit record or we're just going to keep talking. I love meeting other women who are sort of in the throes of taking people into the paradigm of wholeness. As you know, the name of my podcast is Women Seeking Wholeness. And I think it's such a beautiful concept that everything's interrelated. And that, really we are already whole. And I think we can just have this beautiful discussion based on your expertise around what that actually means when we break it down. Because we talk about oneness and the all and totality. And I think we get a little lost in the weeds. I know it's hard for our brains to sort of conceptualize it, but how would you lead us into that discussion? And what does that actually mean to you?
I think one of the simplest ways to put it, my background is as an energy healer and developed this modality Centaura system. And so there's this way sometimes that each of the chakras has a front and a back for those people who are familiar with the chakra system, right? Like it opens to the front and the back. And the crown chakra, which is what's connected and related to oneness in that kind of understanding or modality, its opposing end is actually the root. And I think sometimes we forget that that is a connected and integrated axis. And so what is oneness at the crown is really a sense of belonging at the root. And so I think we learn a lot about integration of that concept of oneness when we remember our belonging to ourselves, to the world, to each other.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, it makes it manageable in some way.
How do we remember that? How do we come into that remembrance? I mean, it can be really like rocky entry into that is what I'm finding.
Yeah, it's also, I think there's a lot of conditioning that we all go through that kind of separates us. We have all of these enculturated ways of feeling like we're separate from the natural world, from parts of ourselves, from our knowing. And so it really is, I think, a dual process of shedding and remembering. And I think one of the words I like to use is direct relationship or direct connection. Really helps us remember our belonging. It just helps us be really present with what's actually here.
So I have found in my life over the last few years, I've been doing a lot of this shedding, deconstructing, deprogramming. A lot of illusory beliefs and paradigms have really shown up for me. And I've had to really deconstruct and really look at, piece apart what feels aligned, what sensorially, I was so disconnected from my actual, sense of knowing because I was deferring my knowing outside of me to authorities.
Yeah.
And that shed, it's like super painful.
Yeah, for better or for worse, that's how things are controlled, right? When we don't have access to our direct knowing, then we're very easily controlled in different ways. And so I think there's a lot of that that's happened throughout history. And then the remembrance brings us back into our power.
Yeah. And what are we remembering exactly?
I think, I keep feeling like I'm just saying these catchphrases and I don't mean it to be that, but I think we're really
powerful.
Yeah, I think we're really remembering the truth of who we are. And I think the truth of who we are is unique to each one of us. It's who we are at an essence level, at a soul level, in the constitution of who we are. And I also think who we are, all of us are these magnificent, multidimensional beings that have an extreme, unique expression in our humanity as well. So really this full spectrum of what it means to be human and what it means to be uniquely us is what we're remembering.
If we try to visualize that, like, I know, I've had some experiences, when I was doing ayahuasca in Costa Rica last year, how I started to sense that, what I was judging, and even the shadow aspects of life, let's just say, or others, you can call that othering, whatever, that I was actually part of that too. And it was very humbling because all my life I'd been taught to sort of just have not everything, but a lot of things at arm's length. Like, this can't come into my space because I'm better than that. Or if I'm going to feel, the Holy Spirit, let's just say, I can't be exposed to X, Y, Z. And even though in theory that's actually a very beautiful concept, because you want to stand in holy places and you want to make sure that you're protected and safe. At the same time, I recognized I was in huge judgment over so many things. And I didn't realize that I was carrying those shadow aspects inside of myself as well, because of this collective way that we're all connected, the collective unconscious, the Jungian stuff.
Yeah. So in the motto, we talk about these consciousness states, and I think it's really developmental. Like, I think there's a period of time where it's really important to create that kind of space and containment so that we cultivate our own vibration or feel like we get into, we get to protect that to some degree. And at some point, we don't go any further, because once we reach a certain vibrational frequency, we're still part of the collective, and we need the energy to flow between us and it. And when we reach this next level, kind of a more integrated state, we're able to actually, there's old like Tonglen practice and in traditions and things, but we're able to actually receive some of the less coherent energy, we'll call it that, something that's a little bit darker or shadowed within ourselves, in the world, denser. Yeah. And then we actually become the transmuter of it. We can receive it and we can center it. We can settle it. We can bring coherence to it. And then when we do that, we become incredibly potent. We become leaders. We bring coherence into the fields in which we're around. And that can happen as a mother in a family cycle or dynamic. Mm-hmm. It can happen, in our work environment. It can happen anywhere, that we can become these vessels for healing. Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean by our multidimensional nature, that we are these sacred beings who are incredibly capable of bringing healing and beauty in everything that we do. And I think not remembering that is a real sad thing. And I also think that when we spend too much time in the place of trying to protect our vibration in that way, we actually lose so much of our own potency and our own interconnection and connection, and how good that feels to be a part of this world.
Yes. I love what you're saying. It's almost like we can catalyze or metastasize sort of those denser energies, as opposed to just being like, because I think of, the great healers and teachers and masters. I mean, obviously Christ is my dude. He's the one that I look to. and he did go into those places. He did, touch lepers, and, the woman taken in adultery, and all of these, the blind, the people that were just, and I find that so ironic that we've been conditioned to fear that. We've been conditioned to, not put ourselves, quote unquote, in those situations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a pacing element too, right? It's like, how much can you digest? It's just like eating. It's like, you take as much as you can digest and integrate, nothing more, and also nothing less. We do get to, that's part of our nature of being here. We do get to be a part of things and take in what it is ours to take in.
Yeah.
And digest and be with. Yeah.
I think you kind of nailed it when you were talking about separateness. There's a way to protect yourself without separating yourself. And it is a very subtle, I feel like it's a nuanced way to be spiritual. Yeah. Because I've seen people get taken down by these denser, darker energies. And really, like, they're not in the driver's seat. Like they just don't have the wherewithal or even the love and compassion. And that's sort of my gauge. My test or gauge when I'm interacting with a person, place, or thing is how does this feel in my body? And in times past, I would have been really scared. Like, I don't have the tools, or I don't have the ability to protect myself or strengthen my own energy field. And now it's as quick as just asking and then just visualizing that protection around me. What are some ways that you found to be able to go into those places? You could say the trenches or the gutters, if you will, because I know you work with a lot of people and you're probably confronting these things all the time. I know that I am as well. So how would you tell somebody, or how do you personally like shield up or protect yourself?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways of looking at it. And I think one of them is dedicated practice. I think that knowing ourselves in that way is really important. So, a dedicated meditation practice, knowing a field of stability and centered and groundedness within myself is something I can return to again and again, and having built a bridge to that. So building bridges we talk about as being like going into a triggered state and then learning how to bring myself back, being able to learn how to do that quicker and quicker to settle self again and again. And so that's like nervous system training, essentially.
Yeah, nervous system regulation. So can you just give us an example of how you do that when you get triggered?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a lot of tools and techniques and practices with the energetic model that we work with. I don't so much do shielding work at this point. I mean, I think it's useful in critical moments and it can help. But I think it can also limit the field in some way. It kind of like, there's in Chinese medicine, there's a way they say you can trap the robbers in the house. It kind of like just stops everything from moving. So one of the things that we talk about is actually, if we know ourself in those places, it's like what you were talking about before. Things can only stick to me in the places where I still have a tendril of resonance in me. So if there's a place in me that has that level of, it has, fear, disgust, loathing for some type of energy that I'm interfacing with, that's generally also because there's some resonance of it within me that I haven't made peace with. So in me, over time, cultivating and knowing myself in that place. So tending to my internal parts. So if something's really scary for me or uncomfortable for me that's confronting me and I'm getting triggered, if I can slow down and just kind of do this internal dialogue with self, well, what's happening here? This discomfort in my body and my system. If it had something to share with me, what would that be? What's it trying to tell me? And it's not that I believe what this part is trying to tell me, but in listening to it, my nervous system starts to settle. And oftentimes there's tremendous wisdom. It's like talking to my child. I'm not going to necessarily say, I'm going to believe you and I'm going to do whatever you tell me to. But it's saying, I hear that you have a need. Maybe it's like, I don't want to be around this person. Or if I'm around this person, then I need to sit clear in my seat and have a little bit more boundary and direction in my communication. I'm not just going to take them in completely. There'll be some information that's coming. And so it's like this nuanced listening to the needs of my own system. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it's a little bit of an abstract, again, way of saying it, or I don't know if it's abstract. I think there's a lot of steps to learning how to do that. Mm-hmm. But I think that the biggest piece is to remember ourselves in the conversation or dynamic that's arising, to come back to self. Mm-hmm. Because I think in a triggered state, again, if I'm talking about self as that true nature, there's a way that I've left myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that creates more separateness, like we've been talking about. And one of the visuals I like to do for myself is I picture like an egg, but it's like around me, but it's not completely shielding me from everything, but it's like a permeable membrane, like an egg of light. So things can come in, but I get my energy and my higher self get to direct that.
Yeah.
And so it's just a safe container where, like you said, I don't want to block things out unnecessarily. Again, that creates more separateness, but at the same time, I know my limits and I trust that I'm supported. The universe has my back, whatever you want to call it.
Totally. And also it's like, in what moments it's like, in energy work and things, people will say like, some models will say like, keep everything open and flowing. And it's not appropriate for us to always be open all the time. Right. It's kind of like our body and our systems have this intelligence that is like a flower, when it's a cold, dark night, or when the rain comes, the petals close and then they open when it's sunny and nice. And when it's too sunny, they kind of shut again. Right. There's this intelligence of how big our aperture is. And so it's like reinstating that intelligence in our own system. Yeah.
I love that metaphor. Well, let's talk about how you teach certain keys to reclaiming your own unique relationship with all of life. So I'm really curious about that. What are those keys that you teach?
Yeah. It really is about coming into direct relationship and taking the time to listen. Is that if we go back to all of our ancestors, every single one of us, there was some way that they were connected to the land and that they were connected to the nature that was around them. They were connected to the rhythms and the cycles of life and time. And they had to be, because that is how they survived. That's how they lived. But we are, in the greater model, we would say, we're part of a greater interconnected field. So the cycles of the sun and the moon and the stars and the spring and the summer and the winter and the fall, all of these things really do impact us and matter. And there's something that we can partner with. So one of the most simple things we can do is start tracking the seasons and cycles and noticing how we relate to them and how they relate to us in different ways. And building a direct relationship. So this is, in my mind, it's less about astrology and understanding what someone says about, this or that or the other that's happening. That's all useful and good too, but also just really feeling for how we're impacted by some of the greater flows in life, the currents in life.
So is that just like deep listening, like being the observer? Is it kind of like teach me nature, or how does that play out for you?
So all of those things that can happen. So yeah. So we can get into direct conversation with nature for sure. We can say, teach me nature. We can go out and decide and choose as something that speaks to us. Most of us will have something like that. We'll have a tree or a river or something that we feel really connected to, and really allowing ourselves to humble ourselves in the presence of that and asking, in the same way with that internal voice, if there's something you wanted to share with me, what would it be? To go sit in meditation, eyes closed, center with self, and then open eyes and be present with this body of water or this flower or whatever it is. And asking directly, if there's something that you had to share with me, I feel called and compelled to be with you. I feel your beauty. Is there something more you'd like me to understand or know? And to let that dialogue kind of open, just to go that extra step and to be, honestly, I think oftentimes amazed and humbled by the wisdom that'll be shown. There's more and more, even in kind of real world applications, there's things with biomimicry and things where they'll talk about city planning, and that they're realizing, if they had self-driving vehicles, the most intelligent way for those systems to move would be the way the blood moves in our body in and out of a central hub that's like the heart. That would be the most efficient movement pattern. And so there's all these ways that I think the natural world, that's one of the ways I think we've become separate. We've built all these constructs and structures that are really separate from what we are actually embedded in and a part of. Yeah. And life has this mysterious unfolding, this way of our mind not knowing, but our ability to begin to listen and connect and follow and be with can really transform our our way of thinking, our way of seeing, our way of being in ways that I don't think I could even begin to say what that would be. Right.
Right. It's so hard to put into language because it's very experiential and it's very body based. I was telling you earlier that I have done a lot of deep dive research and just sort of mystical pilgrimages all about connecting to this divine feminine essence. And you could call her mother. Of course, there are many archetypes that I attribute or that I attach to, like Mary Magdalene and things like that, Isis. But it all does come back to this earth-based model. Our bodies having the same cyclical rhythms as the earth, and everything in the universe being a macrocosm for the microcosm that we are. How do so aside from like going out in nature, let's say you lived in a very urban setting. I don't. I mean, I can look out my window and see mountains behind me. I know you live in Santa Cruz by the beach, but what would you say to someone who's sort of landlocked, I guess, or maybe they don't have, I have my own way I'm going to answer this, but I'm so curious how you would answer it. How do you bring that into your space, no matter where you are? Like if you're on an airplane or you're, you know what I mean? Or you're stuck in traffic or something like that, and you want to come back into center and you want to come back to that oneness feeling. We always have anchors. We're always still part of this earth. We're always still part of the land. So even if I'm in a skyscraper, I can still feel down into the earth that's below, that's holding the building itself. And there's always, even on a sunny day or on a cloudy day, the stars are always out there shining. I can always connect to that and actually feel that in some way. And, in Santa Cruz, I can feel, even if I was in some other context, I know I have a relationship with the Pacific Ocean and I have a relationship with the Sierra Mountains. And I've traveled a lot and done pilgrimages also to holy sites and sacred sites all over the world. And so I can even feel, if I wanted to, a matrix connection to these places that I've been to and felt, and I can feel myself and orient in that way. And that is actually, earlier you were asking what I do if I'm triggered. That is one of the ways that I can stabilize. If I remember my belonging, if I remember connect energetically to these relationships that I have cultivated with these places and their histories and their lineages and the life that's there, the transmission that they hold, a mountain holds a presence. Yeah. And when I connect and remember that, it settles me. Those places remember who I am, even if I forget. Well, we leave our energetic signature wherever we go. I love that. I'm writing that down, putting a star by it, because there are certain places that I've gone where I felt like I was just in France and I spent a couple of weeks in the base of the Pyrenees. It's a lot of Cathar and Gnostic history. It's super fat. Well, by the time this airs, it will have been several months since I've been there, but I just felt so like home. And there was a purity to the land that I don't feel here. And so I love that practical advice to just ground into like connecting to those places, like the little matrix of where I've been and what I believe some of those places can actually activate dormant parts of your DNA. And I know that I have awakened just a little bit more each time, like Glastonbury and France and New Zealand and all these places, like, Mount Shasta. I was in Mount Shasta last year, which is considered like the root chakra of the world. It's not too far from where you live. So yeah, I love that. And again, coming back to that person who maybe hasn't gone to those places, but maybe they could even just visualize themselves being there, like at Stonehenge or someplace cool. I thought of doing that with archetypes, but I never thought of doing that with the land. So that's super powerful. Well, and that's the place where it's weaving that oneness into belonging. Like it's more rooted, right? It's like more of the root area of our own being. And that it's helpful in that way. I think also the reciprocity is so important. It's like, those places activate you and you activate them when we visit. Like it's like both. There's this relationship that goes in both directions, and really honoring that, honoring self and honoring place. Our choices and actions matter. We hold so much potency in ways. It's almost like the land thanks you for coming, which sounds so woo, but there is something, not that we haven't been going into the woo already, but there's just something about, like, thank you for taking the time to honor this land. Thank you for feeling into it and sitting with it, as opposed to just a tourist who comes and goes and, snaps a couple of pictures just to be on social media or whatever. There's this honoring that you can feel like a reverential exchange that you're saying. Not only are we being activated by these beautiful land energy signatures, grids, whatever codes within the land, but we're doing that for the land as well. We're leaving ourselves there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And offerings in that way, in some way, yeah.
Right. So I want to talk about one more thing that you teach, and that is deconstructing the way we create and move in the world. We've kind of already been talking about it, but I'm particularly interested in the deconstruction part of your teaching around this.
Yeah. In pretty much all mystical practices, right? Like in all different cultures have a mystical component, like religions will have a mystical aspect. And I think one of the most common things that I see in those is that there is a period of deconditioning, that there's a way that we kind of get, enculturated and conditioned, and there's this process of this shedding, of this letting go and remembering who we are. So we've said all this already. So now I'll go a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, because before you can remember, you have to clear the space and get rid of all that.
Yeah. And so here's the interesting thing is that I don't know that there's another pathway than sometimes getting confronted with the conditioning in ways that are uncomfortable. And another way of saying that is maybe suffering. We hit places where, where something doesn't make sense anymore. Like it doesn't feel right. It doesn't fit. And we start to feel that, we feel the rub of it. I think that the places that are deeply conditioned in ways that are counter to the truth of who we are, those places create dis-ease. They create incoherence. And those things over time, manifest as sickness or as distortions in our lives, relationships that are failing. There'll be symptoms of that. And so those symptoms tend to be the first thing that we see. And as we start to presence those symptoms in whatever ways we do, the deconstruction can start to begin.
And when you say presence them, just don't resist them. Allow them to teach you, like you were saying, your inquiry process before. It's just, what are you showing me? As opposed to, oh, this is super uncomfortable. It's so not spiritual.
Yeah. I mean, so there's this interesting thing too, where it's like, life is paradox.
Oh
like
my gosh.
Life in the third dimension is paradox. That's just what it is. And something happens when we reach that, we call it creator consciousness, where we reach that place where we can take in and digest and bring something new to the table in some way. That's when we've really learned how to bridge the paradox, where we can really feel the both and in different spaces. So before that, we're oscillating. And when we're oscillating, we're either really, really good or really not good. We're looking at lightness and dark. We're choosing one or the other. And that's developmentally what's going to happen for a while. And at some point we need to cultivate enough of our light presence, our understanding, what we actually value and believe, know ourselves in that way, that then we can start bridging back towards integrating the wounded places, integrating the shadow aspects in ourselves and in the world. And then we become these really potent beings. Then we're actually creating something new, because we can take in what's here and bring something more to the world. And so within that, there's something I sometimes like to say, it's a little tongue in cheek, but we kind of get to choose our darkness. We don't get to choose if there is darkness. So it's always going to come both and. Light and darkness must balance each other, will always come together, but we get to choose to some degree what the darkness is. So if I just want to keep searching for the light, seeking for the light, then these shadow things are going to come in sideways and blindly. But if I am willing to look at what's actually here and turn towards the darkness and hold it in a spaciousness of darkness, something more like the rich soil of the earth or the black velvet of this night sky without stars, like that richness.
The cosmic womb.
The cosmic womb. Yeah. So I can cultivate a relationship with that and start to feel safe in that mystery, in that emptiness, and that not knowing. Then my nerves subtle. Like if we focus on light's beautiful. I love
That's spiritual bypassing. It doesn't work.
It is, but also it's like very much on the energetic nervous system level, too much light in the system fries the nervous system. We go into manic states.
Interesting.
So really balancing it with that spaciousness, that between and around every particle of light, there's endless spaciousness. Our whole system settles.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's actually gave me full body chills because, again, my conditioning religiously was to fight the darkness. That this whole earth experience is a battle. And here we go with paradox because it is to a degree. Yep. But I had such literal armor and walls up that when I started to feel these uncomfortable, normal human shadow feelings that everyone holds, I personalized it. There's something wrong with me, or I've put myself in a situation where I've lost the light. What did I do wrong?
Yeah.
As opposed to, I literally was in my 40s before I could even look at that paradox and go, wait a minute. What if this is actually the optimal way to reach enlightenment? Is to hold that darkness and not fear it. And I'm still trying to parse out what that actually means for me, but these visuals really help. And it's very affirming to have people say, that you can't stay in these high frequency states for elongated periods of time, because number one, you're not grounded. You can't, there's no relatability with other, and human connectivity is very breached. If you're all the way up here, again, coming back to Christ, he did both. He was doing both. We don't want to look at that.
Yeah. And we can absolutely sustain really expansive states when we are also integrated and grounded. We can't sustain them when we are vacillating. Then we have crashes and rises. But so we have to slow ourselves down, and we slowly expand up and down simultaneously. Like this weaving happens, and then our stability and our foundation gets really, really strong. And I just want to go back and just acknowledge how touching it is to hear you share about your process. It's a scary thing to start turning towards. And people do get taken out by it. So how do we know and trust, that we're not gonna, that there's absolutely, I think so much when I'm feeling things and speaking to things, birth is a really huge metaphor for me. And I think in every birth, there's a risk of death, right? There is risk in all of these things.
It reminds me of the Lord's Prayer, though, something about the valley of the shadow of death. Yeah. I fear no evil. Yeah. I mean, I can't remember the exact scripture, but thank you for that acknowledgement. It's still a process, and I still find myself in extreme self-doubt when I am just experiencing normal shadow states. Yeah. Because again, the conditioning is, well, you've done something wrong to distance yourself from the divine, from God, from the spirit, from presence. So come back and ask for forgiveness or repent because you did something and that may or may not be true, but but that was my literal trajectory. Every fleeting thought that I had was around that.
Yeah. So much what I remind myself and the people around me is that, the divine is loving. The divine is a lover and caring. The divine is not an authoritarian dictator. And so in those states, hitting those states of whatever, the doubt, the pain, the confusion that arise again and again in different ways and different layers, and we may not have it for years. And then something happens in life and we hit a new layer and something shows up for us. It's remembering the words the divine is here too. There is nowhere we can go to be without that love. There is nothing that is not connected to the source. Nothing. The darkness is that too. Right. And so as soon as we remember that, something begins to shift, something begins to change. So instead of reaching to change something and manipulate it and manhandle it and fix it, if we just remember that, everything begins to change beyond the way my mind can understand how to change it. I don't know how to deal with my own suffering or the suffering in the world. Absolute humility in that. I don't know how to do that. but I trust that something greater than me that also lives deep inside of me does. And if I can just remember that again and again and again.
I love we keep coming back to that remembrance and remembering that. And it's alive in us. And we put barriers or walls or different things around it it wants to bubble up. It wants to, I love how you use the word expansiveness, like we can achieve this state where, I have known people like this actually, and it kind of blow my mind, but just, sustaining the state of love, sustaining the state of embodiment, connection to the natural world and the supernatural, if you want to go there as well. And also just like grounded and real. They're not so up here that no one has relatability with them. And I guess that was one of my concerns, is that if I hit a certain spiritual state, where do all my friends in the gutter go? Right. So then I came back into, that was the real Christ. What you're wanting to be, that was the real Jesus, not what we've been, told to believe. It was this removed figure that was trying to get us to be perfect. Yeah.
It like makes me teary to hear that. Yeah, I think
there's a lot of people who have wounds with this, and they don't know that they have a wound with this, and how we've been taught that there's a certain performance-based worthiness scale, and it's I see it all the time, actually. And I see parents playing this paradigm out with their children, thinking this is the right way to be because this is how God is, right? Anyway, I could ramble on and on about it, but when we're talking about real deconstruction, it is so empowering and scary and like all the paradox stuff. But when you start to come out on the other side of it and you recognize, hey, it was in me all along. Hey, I was always on the right path. Hey, I didn't do anything wrong to ever separate myself. Like that realization it brought me to my knees actually for like weeks. Yeah. Well, I love everything that you share in your smart cookie. I felt really aligned with your way of explaining this process of oneness. And I know that you have great tools for people with Santara systems. Do you want to kind of direct us to where the best places are to find you and what you do?
Yeah. CentaurSystem.com is my website, and we have a monthly membership where we do a lot of things with the seasonal cycles. So we have kind of transmission meditations that go with the new moons and full moons, and we go into practices around the equinoxes and solstices in a non-religious way. It's kind of not by any particular way, but kind of just presencing, so we can find our own truth with that. And for you guys, I'll also offer just at CentaurSystem.com, we'll do a special page just for this podcast episode, and I will give some practices in meditation to go with some of what we talked about today.
Oh, beautiful. And I will definitely put that in the show notes. Okay. Thank you so much. Gitanjali.
Yes.
Gitanjali. Like I said, it sounds so beautiful. Well, I see it on paper and then I try to say it, and it's not so beautiful when it comes out. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me here. It's been wonderful to meet you and to connect.
This was such a rich discussion on everything from faith deconstruction to cultural deprogramming to shedding and remembering and just doing away with the illusion of separateness. And also just remember that we're always bridging paradoxes. We're always going to be in some kind of tension or struggle with trying to alchemize and harmonize all the energies within and around us. But it doesn't have to be suffering. This whole discussion about inclusivity and loving what is and embracing the all, because really we are in service to the whole. We are in service to the all when it comes right down to it, both within ourselves and with our own missions in this world. Check out the new Stand Speak Shine course I've got on my website, CherieBurton.com. course, you can see that that's been revamped. It's now an evergreen course, a 12-week dive into the 12 feminine embodiment practices and how they do bring you into inner alignment and get you back in touch with your soul voice. Because remember, it keeps coming back to slowing down, deeply listening, and allowing what is. That said, have a glorious week. Take care of you, and we'll talk to you next time on Women Seeking Wholeness.